One Halloween night in the early 90s, I chose to watch Hocus Pocus instead of Dumbo, and that choice has shaped my entire creative life. So, if you're a horror kid at heart, or you're just curious to see how comics come to life, stick around. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Andrew and I'm an illustrator, and I'm coming back to making art in my mid-30s with a focus specifically on comic books and horror comics and all of that good stuff. So yes, that first opening story is my joking but also true origin story, if you can call it that. Sometime in the sort of early 90s, I remember my mom picked up like the TV Guide, if anyone remembers those, and it was Halloween, and I'd go trick-or-treating and I'd come back and watch a movie, and she said, well, according to this, there's two. There's Dumbo, which is about a flying elephant, and there is Hocus Pocus, which is about three witches. And I, probably without even blinking, said, I'll watch Hocus Pocus. And she said, oh, it might be a little bit scary. And I said, it's fine, I'm going to watch it. This is me, by the way, about 4 years old. I was very adamant, I'm watching Hocus Pocus. And I'm pretty sure that led me down a path that I'm still on, because I don't think I've ever actually seen Dumbo all the way through, but I've watched Hocus Pocus pretty much every year since then, and I'm 35 now. So it's definitely been impactful. Hocus Pocus was sort of a gateway drug to things like The Addams Family, to things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and all through those other like horror movies that I was way too young to watch, but absolutely fell in love with. So today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about inspiration, where I got my inspiration for the current projects that I'm working on now. And I can't really do that without really delving into my own sort of history. Because when people say, where do you get your ideas? I don't think it's so obvious sometimes. Ideas are they're abstract. They kind of live with you for a while before they actually become a thing. And so sometimes it's really hard to answer that question. Where do your ideas come from? My life, my own history. So I want to sort of try and unpick a little bit of that and share that with you today. So horror was always something I was interested in. I don't really know why. Why are we always interested in the things we're interested in? It's something just in us that responds to it. I think some people think it's weird that one of my relaxing movies is The Exorcist. But these are also people who watch true crime, so I don't know which one's stranger. So when it comes to horror, it's something I was always interested in, and it was just something that excited me. But a lot of what excited me about it was actually the imagery and often the illustrations. So I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember these, if anyone ever collected them in the 90s as well. This was Spinechiller magazine, and this is something I absolutely adored. If I could get them, I would get one. And I still kept them, and these had fantastic stories, like fictional stories with really wonderful illustrations, but they would also delve into weird things that happened around the world, and they had little short comics that were based on urban legends. There was just a lot of really interesting reading in it, and you would often get playing cards or other little goodies with it that I unfortunately don't have those anymore, but I still have most of the issues that I collected back in the day, and I refuse to part with them no matter how many clear outs I do. Along with Spinechillers, though, I was absolutely obsessed with the Goosebumps novels by R.L. Stine, and I read as many of them as I could get, or if there was any in the school library. I also watched the TV show, and I loved the other TV show, Are You Afraid of the Dark, as well, the original. That was so good. And I'm starting to see already the sort of anthology nature of the stories that I enjoyed relating to what I'm working on now. I don't have any of my original Goosebumps novels anymore, unfortunately, but I do have some of the Fear Street novels, which were sort of for a slightly older audience, and I managed to get them actually later. But the Goosebumps novels had wonderful illustrations. The originals by Tim Jacobus, who worked mostly in like acrylic, which I always just found really inspiring. I love seeing when things are like made by hand and you can tell. So that was always really interesting to me. As I said, that kind of led me down the Buffy the Vampire Slayer route. I was always very interested in that, and I watched it from pretty much the beginning all the way through. Never missed an episode. And Thursday nights I had to have the TV because there was no way I was missing it. So that kind of led me down other paths, as I said, looking into other horror movies, and I've seen all the sort of classic sort of 70s and 80s ones, and then, you know, ones from today that I really like. And while I don't love all horror movies, I think that's impossible, I appreciate ones that have a certain type of atmosphere, a certain, you know, really good storytelling, but really interesting imagery. You know, kind of, I like atmosphere, I like the mood, I like the vibe, and that's something that really inspires me to try and create something of my own in my own medium. Since all of those early influences really inspired my taste in things going forward, and that sort of matured as I did, that always had in the back of my mind the idea that I wanted to make something of my own with a similar feel to it, that that I just put my own stamp on. And that was something that just kind of percolated in the back of my head for years. And I think that's the thing about ideas, is they can sometimes take a long time to happen, and it's okay. You're allowed to let ideas generate for a while and just sit with it. You know, because sometimes timing is everything. The idea of Greywater, the series I'm working on at the moment, had been in my head for years before I even started anything to do with it. But when it came to be in its original form, when it was finally made into a thing, it was actually a novel. And I wrote a novel I was accepted to a writing course during COVID in 2020, just when it had started. So we were all in the very first lockdown. And I was really grateful to have that to go into, to sort of take my mind off it and meet other creative people virtually and work on this thing, so that you weren't so much obsessing over what was happening around us. But I wrote that novel in that group. And that was a really interesting experience. And we had published writers there giving us advice. And it was nice to sort of really flesh out the ideas. And it really taught me to plan my stories better, because I often had a tendency just to jump straight in, but with no real outline. And by the time I finished something, I had 40 characters, and like half of them were irrelevant, and the other sort of, you know, quarter were doing the same thing. So, you know, you were able to kind of cut things down and really understand why an outline, or even some sort of an outline, is important. So I learned a lot. But that book then was made, and then I had trouble sort of sending it out to people. I don't think people it wasn't really the right time for that kind of a story. And I had a lot of writer friends actually tell me that maybe I should turn it into a graphic novel. They had seen some of my illustrations, and they kind of thought that it was such a visual story that it might actually deserve to be told visually instead of just in prose. And even though it does mean losing some of the language, I think maybe having the visual imagery would be more impactful. So that is what I decided to do. So Greywater essentially is the small town based in the Irish Midlands where I set all of my horror stories. So they're in the same locations as a sense of world building, but they all happen to different people. But they are somewhat connected through secondary characters. So this story was about a department store, which I do still intend to adapt into a graphic novel. But at the time that I decided to do it, I was kind of really burnt out for numerous reasons, health reasons, work reasons, and I had just kind of run out of creative steam. But at the same time, a friend of mine who works in a library had asked me to teach a children's graphic novel course, how to make a graphic novel essentially, throughout the summer. And so I agreed, and it really kind of lit a fire under me to think, you know, I hadn't really done a lot of artwork up until that point for a long time, and I really needed to have something to show them. So if I was going to teach them to make comics, I really needed to be making them as well. So I got to work. I took the first chapter of the novel and made it into a script. And then I thumbnailed that script, and I was able to bring that in and show them. And that really helped me sort of refine what I wanted to do, and actually how ultimately writing a novel can be different to writing a graphic novel. and sometimes certain things are less relevant when you're telling a story visually as they are when you're telling them just through prose. So they are different animals, and the pure adapting of one did not necessarily work. So it needed a little bit more refinement to go into this new medium. So that class went well. That was really fun, and it was really satisfying. It wasn't something I had thought I would do, and it was something that I would happily do again now. But I took a little bit of a break from it after that. But when I went back to it, I really wanted to get into that world again. That story wouldn't leave me alone, and more so, that town wouldn't leave me alone, that place. And I really kind of wanted to just jump back in, but I felt like I didn't have the creative steam yet to take on a very big project. So I thought, what about having some short stories, sort of along the lines of Creepshow, the anthology, which also has its own comic books now, which are really fun. But things like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Those sort of anthologies set in the same place or told by the same people. So that's what I did. And in the original story, the character of Mike had a podcast where he reported on the odd stories that would happen in the town of Greywater. And my main character listened to this podcast, and that was kind of how they met. And I thought, what an interesting idea. I could actually take him and give the short stories, basically be episodes of his podcasts, and it would be formatted like that. And that was sort of my way in. I was able to use a secondary character that had sprung to life on his own and use his podcast as a way to tell my stories. And then I could do short stories. I could do 10-page stories, 15-page stories, things that were manageable for where I was currently at and not take on too much. So I could build myself up to working on a much bigger project, which is what I'm doing, but still feel like I'm exercising those muscles and I'm getting creative satisfaction. And so that's what I ended up doing. One way I kind of got my creative groove back was by actually asking myself, what is it I really want to work on? And I asked myself that question that you sort of, other people have asked before, where it's, what would I have liked to do when I was 10 or when I was 8? What would I like to do when no one cared? What did I do back when I was a kid? And I used to make a lot of books. I would make, I'd loved bookbinding, and I used to like to make old creepy books, like spell books from TV shows or just other kind of vampire journals or whatever it was. I thought it was so fun, and no one cared. No one cared at all. I made them, and that was the enjoyment. The only people who saw them were the people I showed. And so that was it. This was long before social media. So the satisfaction was purely in the making of it and not any kind of a response. And so I wanted to try that again. And I had been watching the Evil Dead movies again, because I have seen them so many times. And I actually went as Ash for Halloween, one of the years just gone. I'll show you a picture of my very quick thrown together costume. But one thing I really wanted for that was a Necronomicon. And I didn't have one for then, but it was in my head that I really wanted to make one. And even though you can buy them, the satisfaction for me would be in the making of it. And so that's what I did. I made my own Necronomicon. And it was so much fun. I brought this to work with me when I was working in hotels. I would make this in hotel rooms. I would, all the different steps. And that really reminded me of what it was to just make something for the fun of it, for no reason, for no one to care about, just for me to actually do something fun. And it really was purely fun, because it's great to have it. I have it now, but all it does is sit on my shelf. The fun was purely in the making of it. So that's what I wanted. I wanted to have a project that gave me that same feeling. And that's what I got when I jumped into these comics. So that's where I'm currently at. Greywater is an expanding universe. It's something that I'm going to keep adding to and keep making stories about while I find my confidence and find my style and refine it, as I build up to this bigger graphic novel that I want to write. And that, of course, will probably be one of many. But as I've said, the joy is in the doing. Once something's made, it's no longer mine. It's everybody else's. It's the people who read it, the people who enjoy it. For me, the enjoyment, the actual fun bit is in the making of it. And so I have to allow for that time. And that's why I encourage people to go back to your ideas that maybe you really were passionate about, but maybe you left for one reason or another behind. Maybe, just maybe, there's some life in it yet. It might not always be, but sometimes you'll find when you revisit something with new eyes, with new life experience, that you can actually bring something to life in a way that you never could have when you first thought of it. Ideas hang around sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Sometimes they really hang around waiting for you to make them into something real. And I think if you've been given this idea, we should go for it, not for any reason other than the thing wants to be made, other than it'll be purely satisfying to actually engage with that idea and make it. That's really what the idea is for. It's not necessarily to make something that will sell or that other people will care about. You get to make the thing. That's the most important thing. Other people don't have to care, but that's not really the point. We all would like to make a living off our creativity, but I think creativity is bigger than that. I think creativity is something that we can engage with, and it really connects us back to ourselves, to our own sense of flow and our own sense of belonging. So ideas, if you've had them for a long, long time, if something takes you 10, 20, 30 years to make, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I think that's something that we kind of don't talk about a lot. We try things and they don't work out, or they don't work out the first time. There's nothing wrong with revisiting them. Nothing is wasted. Some things you use and some things you don't, but that doesn't mean those things that you don't use won't get used later down the line. It's a little bit like, making a casserole, whatever doesn't get used in dinner this week will get thrown into a casserole next week. Everything gets used. It might look different, it might transform, but everything is for something. Nothing is wasted, especially when you're an artist. So thank you for taking this creative journey with me and talking about ideas today. I'm always fascinated about where ideas come from and how they're a mix of things that happen to us over time. It's never just one thing. So yeah, if you're working on something at the moment, if you've been working on something for a long time, or maybe you want to revisit something that you haven't thought about in forever, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what you're jumping back into. And if you'd like to follow along for more of my own stories and experience, or if you just want to see where Greywater and my other arts adventures go, I'd love for you to like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.